I've really been wanting to make a rant video about training stage because it happened again, like KOF 15 from Combo Breaker. It happened again. Like almost every single match of KOF 15 was played on the grid at Combo Breaker, and I'm just like, oh. So I kind of wanted to talk about the history of training stage. You know, go back to like, why did training stage start being the default competitive element for fighting games? What is the thing that led us to this point? What are the alternatives, and what should devs do about it in the future? Because I hate it, man. I despise fucking training stage. It's one of the things that made me not want to watch Street Fighter V, weirdly enough. Let me just see, because the game isn't super like popular at the moment because it is there's no DLC or anything like that. If I would go to search category Street Fighter V and I just look at shit, I don't know. Look at the category itself. There's 2.2k people playing it. Let's just see how many people are playing on training stage, right? I'm just curious. How many people are playing on training stage? Let's find out. All right, just from what we can see, people actually playing. This one. This is a different one, thank God. But this one. Somebody else on a different stage, wonderful. But this one. Every fucking game. Oh God, something different. Oh God, something different. You know? Oh Jesus Christ, they're actually playing on something else. This one. But here's the crazy thing. King of Fighters has like a very similar issue. KOF. So it's not as bad because the game is still relatively new, right? You will get some people that are just playing it for the sake of playing it and not just playing it to grind out. On the grind, you're going to see training stage, but training stage, training. I don't know what the hell's going on. Training, not KOF. Training, and it's about half and half at least on KOF, right? I have a bit to say about why devs are essentially allowing this, and why is it the reason that people meander over to training stage in general. Like, what is the things that essentially allow this? You know what? Fuck it. Let's just do it right now. I'm gonna begin my rant. So my crazy training mode rant. Where did this shit start? Let's go back to the beginning. The beginning of the end. When did the fighting game stage die? What happened? Here we go. Evo Grand Finals 2015. Here's a great example. Here's where it all sort of started, right? So somebody would be asking, bam, the biggest Grand Finals champion of Street Fighter 5, Street Fighter 4 in the world. Where are they playing? Good old the fucking grid. They're playing on the grid. And this is the beginning, right? This is actually, from what I can recall, like the very first of this visual style of training stage. This is where it starts. And anybody that's anybody will know that the majority of competitive matches that you would see in these situations would drop on training stage, right? Why is that? So there's a good reason why training stage exists, like what you actually use it for. The grids aren't here just for less visual interference, which is obviously one thing. The grids are here to line up spacing, right? People would actually use this stage and its grid reference as a method of like footsie location, where people would realize that so much space would essentially be covering certain normals, and you can actually justify it by looking at the stage. A reason why in some situations, back when Capcom Fighters was happening and they had these big Capcom like events for Street Fighter 4, they absolutely had a moment where they were discussing of not allowing training stage for quite some time. And I do recall that training stage was a very popular thing, and at some points during the big official Capcom events, there was no training stage suddenly. Suddenly I'm watching like CEO finals, I'm watching some other stuff happening, and they're using different stages. I'm like, that's weird, right? That's kind of interesting that suddenly there is a different stage being allowed. But ultimately there is other reasons behind this, right? Other than the stage not having any visual differences, like it's about the players, we can't have them being distracted by the backgrounds because backgrounds are distracting. Like, I get that, right? I definitely understand that. There is a technical issue behind this as well. Training stage problems sort of root back to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, because fighting games did not actually run at a locked 60 FPS. For anybody that was very curious about Marvel 3 and Street Fighter 4 especially, like some of the big return fighting games from Capcom, the ones that have training stages and shit, there was significant frame drops in both of these games. Not just on PS3, but somewhat on 360, depending on the stage you picked. Now, there's also a good reason why nobody played on PS3, because it was exacerbated. PS3 had a lot of crazy optimization issues with these games. They ran on average like 55 FPS for the most part. And then the trainings, the big stages also led there to being an issue with that as well. Like there would even be bigger frame drops. So a lot of people played on Xbox 360 because it was the most stable. Anyway, this is the beginning, right? The absolute start of the situation. This is where the grid is essentially introduced. But if we go back to other fighting games, you don't see just training stage all the goddamn time, right? You don't see it absolutely everywhere. This is the beginning of what everyone can recall in this situation. Why is that? Because they make training stage selectable by the players, right? It isn't the fact that you can just jump into a training stage and then practice stuff and get your grid spacing and do all that crazy bullshit, right? No, it's the fact that when you're actually in a match and you choose to fight people, you can just make an agreement. If not player one or whoever it is that is picking the stage can just pick training stage. It's an option, which is interesting because you would think that the training stage would be remained for training, right? That at some point there would be just training for these specific stages and not actually in competitive play, if not online and stuff like that. But this sort of was a following effort that would continue from this game to others, where training stage would just be a continual thing that would happen from this point forward. But there is other options, right? And the big one was Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And the majority of fights that you would see on MVC3 were either played on this training stage, which is a dupe of Marvel 2, or it was played on an alternate training stage. So that was kind of nice, right? There was a danger room training stage in the game that actually gave us a couple of different options. Granted, this is a much better looking training stage, but it isn't just the fact that it's just like a grid, you know, on every single game. It's the fact that the audience is essentially looking at the exact same thing over and over again, you know? But Marvel 3 is an interesting game because it's dark. This game has a lot of stages in it that are specifically not lit very well and at nighttime. And here's the funny thing. If you got a roster of characters like Wesker, Virgil, and Dante, characters that you can all have black costumes on a dark stage, it became legit difficult to see these characters do stuff on like 3/4 of the stages in the entire game, right? They blended into the background so ridiculously well that it was kind of insane. So there's clearly a lack of insight from the devs in these situations as well. But there was some answers to this, right? Even though Street Fighter V currently is a game that is mostly played on training stage, there was some answers to this in Street Fighter V and its tournament seasons. And I do have to give Capcom a lot of credit for this because they did think about something, right? They did try to figure it out. Almost any big finals I would look at for Street Fighter, if I went to actual like live in-person tournament, here's 2017, for example. What are they playing on? Well, they're not playing on training stage. I got to give Capcom a big credit for this because what they did was for especially competition and their big events, they chose giant celebratory like esports competition rings. In fact, you can sort of get an idea when each event is happening based on what CPT stage is actually in the background. Great idea. In fact, this is like something that sort of cements where these games are sort of taking place and when they're taking place. I actually really think this is a good take for the situation. However, that's something that is represented for Capcom games, right? It's something that's specifically represented for like official Capcom Cup competition, because the majority of, if you go back to look at any other Street Fighter V like finals and stuff like that, here was the one from last year. Oh, it's all on training stage, right? So there's a reason why this is the way it is. At least this is a different training stage. But once again, this is a game that's crossplay. between consoles, and there can once again be issues with frame drops, or people are playing on potato PCs and the game is only so scalable. There's a lot of like nuance in this situation, but it still is an issue that the majority of stages that are being played on a lot of fighting games that have selectable training stage all default back to this. And it's not even the fact that just the training stage is selectable. Competitive players are going to play on whatever stage works the best if training stage is not selectable. I have another great example for this. Killer Instinct is a game that does not have a training stage available, but you'll notice that there's quite a few variety of stages that are picked throughout this, right? However, there's a couple of very notable stages that Killer Instinct players will stick to that are essentially not training stage, but are competitively viable. And one is definitely Agnos' stage, and the other one is Thunder's stage, right? These stages have good visibility, relatively decent visibility, don't have that much crazy elements happening in the background that can make stuff super jarring or distracting. And I think that's okay, right? I think that's like relatively fine. We've seen similar stuff happen to Guilty Gear as well, where Guilty Gear has quite a few stages in console versions that'll drop frames, man. That one big party celebration stage that's happening where all these like giant boats and this big, huge, wonderful celebrations happening in the background. It's beautiful. It's the best looking stage in Guilty Gear Strive. Nobody plays on it, right? Nobody plays. It's an Axel stage. Yeah, nobody plays on that shit because the stage has frame drops on base PS4. So the majority of matches you'll see is on a very specific stage in Guilty Gear Strive because the game does not have a actual training stage. I think that's, once again, that's decent. It's something, but it's also rooting back to the problem, which is actually devs, right? It's weird that all these games are super hyper esports focused. Like a lot of them are ready and willing and waiting to make themselves like an esport in some way, right? They're ready to go out the bat and to make sure that people are going to be playing this game competitively, and they're all going to be playing it on an even level at the same level of competition through and throughout, right? So it's really baffling to me that devs will still release stages that are unstable, will still release stages that have heavy visual issues, and it's still a problem. This started in Street Fighter 4 in like 2008, right? It's still a problem to this day that some stages just get a little too crazy and will drop frames and drop inputs. And that to me is a huge oversight from developers, right? It's a huge oversight that devs still aren't accounting for the fact that how the hell is stages still causing like issues with frame drops and dropped inputs? Like how are we still at a point where this is a thing that is happening? And I think needs to be addressed for the future of fighting games, especially. I think it's a big weird issue that we have all these stages in fighting games and only like 1 or 2 of them get used. If not, the non-stages are the ones that are primarily used. Ultimate Marvel 3 was played at Combo Breaker over the past like week or so, and you'll notice that the stages that are picked throughout this are either the one I was mentioning earlier, the Danger Room training stage, which is a great training stage. This one actually looks pretty good. Or this one. They play on Bone Wonderland, because once again, this is a game with a character with a ton of very dark costumes, and they play on a stage that is completely lit. And that's once again like an oversight from the developers as far as like visual readability in games where people just can't see what some of the characters are doing. And that sort of makes sense. This is why this is the majority of the way you see this game played is either on this stage or the very light and bright Danger Room stage, you know? And KOF is no different, right? Hold on a second. I wonder what majority stages this was played on. It looks like it was played on a couple of different stages, which is nice. These guys actually did let this rock on a couple of other stages, but you will see that the majority of matches that go through losers semis and all the way to the end, the greater like 2 hours of this tournament was played on the exact same stage. And granted, this I actually sympathize with the players in this situation. They just want things to not collide with their gameplay as much as possible, but it blows my mind that the stages is the thing that is colliding with their gameplay. It is still a huge issue, and I actually think this solution is up to developers, right? I think it's up to devs to make it so that there is variety. There needs to be variety in matches and fighting games. Things cannot look the exact same for every single game. I can tell you as somebody personally that has known about this for a long time and is also a huge gripe with somebody like myself, you need to have shit look different, right? Yes, seeing the game played at the highest level of competition has its absolute value, but people aren't all watching this game for the highest level of competition. Some people are just watching it for the sake of entertainment, you know, and not just trying to pull strategy. So I think it's up to developers to make this a goddamn priority. I really do. Shout out to Tekken stages for always being different. Yeah, and Tekken, dude, like, let's just, hang on a second. That's a great example. Let's look up Tekken 7. Let's see how much stage variety is here. And here's the thing, stages are critical in Tekken 7. Why? Because the stages are interactable. Stages have certain elements that lead to more damage or lead to breakable moments or lead to cliffs and shit like that. Tekken has like proper stage meta, sort of in the way that Smash Brothers does. Kind of funny because they're made by the same devs, but is a huge part, right? This stage is a big one because this stage leads to like huge ground breaks and shit like that. So you will see that certain stages like this one have nothing, right? Certain stages like this one definitely have some on the walls, and then you get the game's actual training stage, which is this one. The cool part is that if I'm looking at Tekken, I'm looking at every single time I watch a finals for this game, it looks different. Everything always looks different. If I'm just scrolling through this shit, look how much different shit there is. Look how many wonderful stages are that aren't having a negative impact on the gameplay of the game. Like, look at how many different things we've been looking at just through me scrolling through and trying to find examples of this. And they have their own also CPT stage practically, you know? Just to tile this shit together. Tekken 7 recently had an announcement that this game in the series has now become the best-selling game in Tekken history. I'm not saying that Tekken 7's stage variety is the thing that has led to it having such an insane amount of sales, right? For the game essentially being in the best spot that Tekken has ever actually been in the history of the series ever, actually officially beating out Tekken 3. All I'm saying is that Tekken 7 is a very easy spectator sport, right? Playing this game with the stage variety that actually has a meta, visually watching this game is an important thing to take into effect. And one thing that absolutely does help in these situations is the fact that Tekken 7 always looks different. There's always something new to look at that has an impact on the gameplay or a visual difference between the characters and the stages. I think this is just a small example that Tekken 7 is also pretty. It's also a game that was made in 2013, but it still continues to be one of the best-selling fighting games for a lot of reasons. I just want fighting games to not make me have to mod out the training stage anymore. You know, if we can get fighting games to show up and I don't specifically have to mod out the goddamn training stage so I can see something different, then please, dear God, let me just see something different than the exact same stage over and over again. And I don't blame the players for doing this because there is a necessity to do it because the game has essentially left them no options in some moments, in some situations.